Us. I am Drew Armstrong, the executive editor of Endpoints News, and welcome to Post-Hoc Live. Everybody, thanks for joining us. Welcome to Post-Hoc Live. I'm Drew Armstrong, your host and the executive editor of Endpoints News. It is Wednesday, May 27. So I'm actually at the Financial Times offices here in New York, which is accounts for the different and unusual background behind me. But I was at breakfast this morning in the West Village with somebody who works with a lot of the very biggest companies in biopharma. And we were talking about how it feels like there are a number of moments right now where the industry is facing some really big changes. There's our relationship with China, drug pricing, supply chains, AI, and how all of those topics shake out is going to affect what the industry looks like over the decade to come. So today we're going to be talking with somebody who has worked in almost every part of biopharma. Jeremy Levin has led deal making at Bristol Myers and Novartis. He was the CEO of the generics giant Teva. He's founded a biotech and he's chaired the board of the biotech industry group Bio. He's also got a book out right now, Biotech at the Balance. And before he joined us, I have just a little bit of housekeeping. If you're joining us for the first time, hello and welcome. Thank you. Post-Hoc Live brings us the reporting, the analysis, and the discussion that usually happens behind the scenes in our newsroom live to you. If you're on YouTube with us and you're not already following us, please hit that little subscribe button down below our feed to get alerts about future live streams. You can also sign up for the Post-Hoc email on your Endpoints News subscription page. And if you are with us on YouTube today, you can join the chat, the conversation. Our producer will pass along questions to me. So Jeremy, welcome to Post-Hoc Live. Thank you for being with us. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. You're always one of the most fun conversations of folks I talk to. Biotech, you are never short of opinions, commentary, and unlike some people, you have the experience to back those things up. But I was actually curious because I don't know this about you. How did you get your start in this industry and in the life sciences? What's your origin moment for being in biopharma?
Drew, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. And two, I don't think I've ever been asked that question. So good. I was at Hôpital Cantonal de Genève as
You're going to have to explain for our non-French speaking readers what that is.
I was doing a fellowship at the European Hospital in Geneva. It's a teaching hospital. And I went skiing. I bumped into a banker and he said I should come and help him understand a new entity he called it Biogen. And I thought, okay, I don't know what Biogen is, but I went off to a meeting and there everybody's dressed in wonderful suits. They were all looking very, very seriously. And there was a gentleman there saying by the name of Wally Gilbert.
Okay.
And Wally Gilbert, who's one of the founders of Biogen, basically was saying, blah, 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 give me $70 million. And I blinked because I'd never seen this before in my life. I'd never understood this, never heard of an entity like this. But the one thing I was sure about, he was talking about a drug called interferon. And I knew factually what he was talking about was nonsense because I just developed with a drug called Captopril with Bristol Myers Squibb. And I knew how many years it took. Wally was saying, I've got interferon. Give me $70 million. 2 years from now, I'll be selling it. So I thought, this thing called Biogen and this whole area called biotechnology, which was fresh and new, seems pretty amazing. I better have a look at it. And so that's what took me out of academic medicine to the United States to learn about biotechnology. And I've never looked back.
You have a book out. And obviously, we have to kind of fast forward through all the various things that you've done, which we'll come back to because I have a lot of questions for you about your perspective on the industry. But you have a book out right now. Tell me, what the book's about, why you decided to write this right now, and because you're a busy guy. So, why write a book, and what did you decide you wanted to write about, and how'd that turn out?
The book is about a an idea and a concept which says that right now, that if we do not take action as an industry, then 5 to 10 years from now, the American innovation industry, in other words, the biotech innovation, will have suffered an enormous setback, a blow, and innovation will migrate to other parts of the world. Capital will migrate to other parts of the world. So the book is a celebration of the incredible capabilities that we've developed. It is also the recognition that innovation will not stop no matter what, but it is an analysis of, in simple language, about the system that allowed this incredible area of biotech to start with 1 or 2 companies to grow to nearly 2,000 in the country, in the world, in our country, and that there are certain things that we have to understand, that all the infrastructure underneath biotech is shaking right now. But we can take action. The good news is, if we do take that action, while we will not be the largest single producer in 10 years' time, we certainly will be one of the most innovative and competitive in the world.
So how would you, I mean, you mentioned, the kind of the shaking of the core infrastructure under this. How would you define what the pillars of that are? Because I talk to a lot of people who do kind of make the case that we've taken some things for granted and, taken some actions that have been damaging, but also maybe just kind of counted on the, the force of capitalism to keep this thing going, and thought that that would be enough. But talk to me about, like, what do you think the pillars are that maybe people have taken for granted, that we have here in this country?
So in order to answer that question, you have to think a little bit about, where did we come from and where are we now? 1973, you have the extraordinary moment where a scientist meets a venture capitalist and says, I've got a crazy idea. And that venture capitalist then says, I'm going to fund you. And out of that comes Genentech. Then from that moment comes the evolution of the industry to today. Now, what happened during that period of time? What led up to that aha moment was the extraordinary developments that were occurring through the funding in science, NIH, academia. All of that was the basic premise of science, great scientists, and facts. That first fundament is now shaking. We question very facts. We are disassembling the very funding structure that since 1947 has led to the NIH as being the premier engine for innovation in the life sciences. We are challenging across the board academics. Worse yet, what is happening is that we're not attracting the talent that really underlies all of this, the best of the best. We're not having the Albert Einsteins of the nuclear world coming to us in biology. We could do. So that's one area that really suffered. The next is something slightly different, and that is the capital markets. When that aha moment happened in 1973, which led to Genentech, we've not at all treated the area of biotech as infrastructure. We've treated it as a trade. Essentially, it goes, you get funded, you go into the capital markets, people trade you, done. And capitalism per se is a very good thing. But within capitalism, there are clear structures that identify the value of different assets. For example, you are a trade like that if you are in some key areas like the digital world. Things change very quickly. Or you're a very large cap entity where tiny fluctuations are great. You buy, you sell quickly. All of them have one characteristic in common: very short product cycle lines. Ours is not like that. We have a 10-year product cycle line, at least. There is not a single incentive built into the capital structure of our industry, which says we are going to incent you to hold that stock for all that period of time. Instead of which, people welcome volatility. That's craziness. Volatility means for a biotech is you have all sorts of changes. So the tax laws never changed, as they did, by the way, when they said that housing was an infrastructure issue. Therefore, we need to accommodate tax structures to deal with it. Biotech, nothing like that happened. You can hold your stock for a year and you get you get a capital gain based on your long-term holding, so-called 1 year. But imagine a moment if somebody said to you, you know what, I'm going to incent you to hold that stock longer. I'm going to give you a lower tax basis on 5 years. You hold it for 10 years, you don't know anything. You will have a completely different stability concept. Now, also, you consider that if you take real estate, in real estate, you get all sorts of depreciations, you get the right to sell off your debt, all sorts of different things. Doesn't occur with us. So that aha moment many years ago had led us to now live in a world of rapidly cycling, buying and selling in the public markets. And just imagine what that's going to look like in a few years' time when AI starts trading all our stocks, irrespective of what the specialists are. So that's a second area that's really suffered. Third area that suffered profoundly is the benchmark, the golden center of our industry is the FDA. Now, the FDA has needed revision and always will do. Doesn't matter. Institutions always should refresh. But what happened last year was catastrophic. You had a moment when the Doge walked in and wiped out 20% of the jobs in FDA without taking a single moment's thought as to what they actually did. Didn't understand it, didn't care to understand it. It was an economic decision, cut. And the cut they did, sure, there could have been reductions, but not like that. Anybody who's done a reduction in force, and I've done it, and many CEOs have done it, you do it thoughtfully, carefully, and you understand the implications of it. They didn't. The morale was catastrophic. Then you add on top of that, that 90% of all of the senior leadership has either left or turned over since the beginning of last year. That's hemorrhaging institutional knowledge. Anybody who runs a large organization says and can tell you straight away, you're either going to do away with that organization or you're going to change the top very slowly, because that institutional knowledge is absolutely what makes it valuable. And it's been built up over many, many years. So if I had to pick out a few things and just simply say they are not just shaking, they are rocking backwards and forth. One is the questioning of science and truth and the reduction of this extraordinary engine of innovation at the NIH and our academic centers. Two was the failure of, over years, of us not understanding that we're not just a trade, we are fundamental infrastructure into the national security of the United States, and we should have started to, the Congress and the leaders of this country should have understood this and built into their capital structure the understanding of how you get long-term holdings. And then thirdly was the full-on assault against the FDA, which quite frankly has been a great problem. Now, so if you have to ask the question, how come the stock market's going up? How come these companies are continuing to get approvals? Just wait. Wait.
Well, it's interesting. You know, we have some data actually out today. Tom Randall over at Signal, he has his quarterly survey out. It's very interesting to see some of the narrower cuts of that data, where you see actually a lot of optimism and growing optimism on, a number of different fronts, but the one big holdback is the regulatory questions in the U.S. Right now, and I think the degree of uncertainty around that, and obviously the leadership vacuum that you mentioned at the top of the FDA right now. That's on the front of the website. Should be in most of your inboxes. If you're Endpoint subscribers, I would recommend you check it out. I do want to ask you. It's been interesting. We talk a lot about China on this show, and I think it feels like on a national basis, I have not been doing this as long as you have, but I have been doing it for a while. It feels like for the first time ever, the US has a meaningful national competitor in this industry. And, I talked to a lot of people who reference the fact that, in many ways, the US competed and won the big pharma industry many years ago, where Europe really used to be the kind of sole power there, and over the course of many decades, the U.S. pharma industry really rose to prominence. But this does feel like the first time where I think U.S. biopharma has been challenged externally by a competitor that is as sophisticated and capable as we were in building this. And I think that's, I don't want to rehash every single bit of, kind of China talk we've had on the show. But I am really curious, given the multitude of roles that you've held, what your view on the China question is.
Well, my view is very straightforward, and it's formed because I first went to China in 1974. I've seen China since the post-Mao area. And then I've run businesses in China, and I have great respect for the way that they have accomplished what they've done. Unlike the United States, China really early on said that biotechnology, I'm not talking about pharma, I'm not talking about revenue generating generic companies, branded companies, I'm not talking about those guys. They basically don't ever raise a single amount of capital by selling their stock. They're revenue generators. The real innovators is biotech. And the amazing thing about the Chinese is that 25 years ago, they said they were going to explicitly build biotechnology as a core fundamental strength of their nation. And then every 5 years, they repeated that refrain and they took steps. And we can talk about those steps.
Yeah.
In the meantime, United States regarded this as incidental, kind of nice to have, did nothing. And indeed, unfortunately for biotech, it got swept under this sort of, under the carpet of pharma, and it's been hit with all of the pharma problem. What does biotech talk about? Pricing. Why in heaven's name is that the number one topic that we should be talking about instead of innovation? How do we drive innovation? How do we develop innovation? How do we get great products to market? I'm not worried about the economic number of a deal with a pharma company when you've got an innovative biotech and then you walk to a pharma and say, please buy me or buy the product. Not a single projection that I've ever seen in any pharma, Novartis, Bristol Myers Squibb, or Teva, has ever predicted what the sales would be from the product they bought from a biotech. Now, I don't know about other pharmas, but I can tell you I have seen over 200 of those, and they're all wrong. So don't come to a biotech company and say, tell me what your sales are going to be. Develop a great product. And unfortunately for us, we've just been treated as part of pharma for years. We've never had a national recognition that this is a strategic asset. So for me, I made a couple points there. One, biotech is not a simple incidental, it is infrastructure. Two, the Chinese understand this and have executed superbly on this. And oh, by the way, unless we take action within 5 to 10 years. Not only will we have a competitor, we're going to be behind.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to ask you, I mean, how do you think that the China story, if you had to make a prediction or kind of lay out a couple of paths, how do you think that shakes out? Because I feel like I kind of put people into three different buckets right now, where I see the kind of build the wall crowd of shut it all down, don't allow any access, any collaboration. I see the open everything up. We should work with China and buy as many assets as we can. And then I see kind of a middle group of saying, these are from US perspective, saying, you know what, how biotech works is going to change. This is going to become, even for small companies, a truly global industry where we're going to do certain things here, they're going to do certain things there. We'll collaborate. They'll do early stage, development work. We'll still continue to produce innovation here. How do you see, if you had to make a prediction, where do you think this ends up in 5 years in terms of what the global biotech industry looks like?
So I think the map has already been laid down. Two forces are driving it. Number one, capital from this country is washing over the borders and heading to China.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I mean, it's both like entirely obvious if you look at the headlines every day, but I think also taken for granted what the long-term implications of that are.
That's exactly right. When capital migrates, it goes to where it thinks it can make money. That's where the innovation's happening, and that's happening. The second thing, and don't underestimate this, pharma has basically said, you know what? We're heading to China.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm looking for the multi-billion-dollar deals in the United States. I'm hearing crickets. I'm hearing the occasional acquisition, and everybody's cheering that occasional acquisition, but they're not doing the strategic alliances, the massive acquisitions, the multitude of them. So funds and pharma are basically laying the groundwork for what we're going to see. And what we're going to see is massive development of innovative products in China. Not going to stop that. That's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So the real question is whether or not the United States can take a position on that. Because I am firmly of the belief that, yes, there is dual use technologies that you don't want to share. That's different from putting up a block and saying, we're not going to deal with these companies under any circumstances.
Right.
That's a completely different approach. Dual use needs to be controlled. It should be controlled. There are bad actors out there. And I'm one of the few who's probably in my industry who has studied biological warfare and has actually given lectures on the damn area. It's a terrible area. It's an area which should have been stopped many years ago. In 1973, when the treaty was signed, it should have been a triumph. Unfortunately, biotechnology has reopened it again. We need to be conscious of that. But that's not putting up walls. You cannot stop and put up walls. I can't imagine. Can you imagine, Drew, for 1 minute, if somebody says, I have a cure for, let's say, pancreatic cancer.
Right.
It is found in Shanghai. And oh, by the way, you guys in America can't get it.
Yeah, I think that's I've had that conversation with people. I think it's just an incredibly hard, argument to make to a patient, even though I think there are some very real concerns. But yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of hear people arguing, the protectionist approach. I mean, we do it with, car makers. And I think, obviously I don't think it's a very different industry than autos. Obviously, I want to ask you, this is a bit of a, going back into your, more big pharma past. Has the pharma industry and its business practices, do you feel like it's fundamentally evolved over the last 10 or 15 years? I kind of sit and wonder sometimes, companies grow bigger and smaller, but we really structurally essentially have the same set of companies that we had a decade ago, which I think in some, these are very big institutions. There's a lot of momentum behind them, but I think just looking at the scope of the big pharma industry it doesn't really feel that different than it did a decade ago. And I'm wondering how long you think that holds, or why that is, that it feels like not that much has changed for the really big companies.
So first of all, we have to examine the question, has it changed? And then let's talk a little bit about the second half of your question. So there's a very simple metric to ask, has it changed? And that is compensation. Has compensation changed fundamentally, which means incenting people in the last 20 years? No. The bottom line is pharma set in place exactly the same kinds of incentives that you have for any product company. In other words, automobiles. In other words, I don't know, selling cans of goods. It's the same stuff. And you get incented for your top line. You get incented for your profitability. You get incented for a couple other elements that are critical. What you don't get incented for, and hasn't changed at all, more patients staying longer on your drug, launches of new innovative entities. Don't get that at all. Remember what I said, launches of new innovative entities. Nobody in the pharma really cares what they're selling, so long as they sell more. Because the guys at the top, and actually through the company, are incented by that top line. Now, with regard to the patients, you don't get incented to keep your patients on longer. And oh, by the way, nobody wants to acknowledge the fact that when you're on a chronic medicine, nearly 40% drop off by the end of the first year. That means the whole purpose of the medicine has gone away because they get sicker. No pharma has changed. So your comment about no change is correct. I'll go one step further.
Okay.
And that is, you get incented to think more about a buyback of your stock than you do about investing in innovation. Much more money has gone into buying back stock than has gone into seeding new innovative products. So has it changed? No. Will it change? That's a different question. That's a different question entirely. That asks the question, are these giants, are these giants really interested? Will the shareholders have an interest? Does the legislature of the country have an interest in requiring them to think about being innovative, requiring them to change their behaviors? The answer is no. They are constantly of the opinion that the most important thing is stability. Look, 17 large companies went off and did a deal with Trump. Each one of those deals, if you examine them, kind of look the same.
Yes.
And that's pretty remarkable in an industry where you shouldn't have collaboration. I'm just saying.
Let me wrap up, since we just have a few minutes left. If you were starting a new company today, you were going to build a biotech company, walk out of your office, you're about 30 blocks north of me, right here in Manhattan, and you were gonna start a company, where would you be building it, and how would you be building a new company right now?
There is no doubt I would build absolutely in the United States, because that is where the greatest innovation still resides.
Okay.
Number two, I would go globally to link my partnerships into parts of the world like China or Australia, where I know they are focused on building their infrastructure, so that I could take advantage of the acceleration that they're doing, take advantage of the opportunities that they present, and utilize that to grow my company in this country. Because at the end of the day, what could change in China would be massive, irreconcilable, and extraordinary geopolitical change internally. I don't see that happening, but it's a risk which is enormous.
Mhm.
I do see that as unlikely in this country. And so my concept would be buy and build here, but protect by having a very profound and deep relationship in other parts of the world where I could take advantage of a deal, get them to work as they do, much faster than we do, much cheaper than we do, and take all the advantage of what they've done and bring it back here.
Well, Jeremy Levin, thank you so much for being with us on Post-Hoc Live. For folks who missed it at the top, Jeremy has a book out now, Biotech in the Balance. And thank you so much for joining us. That is unfortunately all the time we have for today. Thank you to our audience as well. You can keep up with our coverage on endpoints.news or by subscribing to our newsletters. If you're already signed up for the Post-Hoc newsletter, you'll get notifications the next time we have a show coming up. If you're not, head over to endpoints.news and in the top right-hand corner, hit your reader profile link. You can get to everything from there. This show is going to live on X, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and Blue Sky. You can follow us in all those places to get a copy of the show. And a huge thanks to our producer, Nicole Wetzman, and our engineer, Dalen Turk, for their work behind the scenes, making everything happening. I'm Drew Armstrong, executive editor of Endpoints News. This is Post-Hoc Live. We will see you the next time news breaks.